He left his wife for a younger woman. 2 years later, he sees her in a park, surrounded by 4 children who look just like him. What happens next will leave you stunned. The grandiose halls of the Carter estate resonated with an oppressive silence, a stark contrast to the echoes of laughter and conversation that once filled the air. Ethan Carter sat at his meticulously organized mahogany desk, the weight of decades pressing down on him. His tailored suit, a perfect blend of sophistication and power, felt restrictive today as his fingers traced the edge of the legal documents before him. His expression was steely, a facade honed through years of corporate warfare. Yet, beneath that mask lay a maelstrom of emotions. This was the moment he had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. The end of an era, the conclusion of a partnership that had spanned nearly half his life. Emily, his wife, the woman who had once been the axis of his world, was now an obstacle to the life he envisioned for himself. He believed this was a necessary sacrifice for a chance to rekindle the fire he had lost somewhere in the relentless pursuit of wealth and status. Across the room, Emily Carter sat with poise that belied the turbulence within her. Her eyes, once filled with unwavering affection for Ethan, were now distant and searching, as if trying to fathom the man who sat before her. The papers in front of her were more than mere documents. They were a testament to the dissolution of trust, love, and dreams shared over years. She knew the end was inevitable. Ethan's late-night meetings, his increasing absence, and the distant look in his eyes had all pointed to this day. And yet, the finality of it stung. The name Olivia Bennett lingered in the corners of her mind, a ghost that refused to be exorcised. She had never confronted Ethan about the affair. She didn't need to. The growing gap between them had spoken volumes. Her resolve to sign the papers wasn't born of defeat, but of understanding that clinging to a man who had already left her emotionally would only corrode her spirit further. "I never thought it would come to this," Emily's voice broke the silence, each word weighed down by a mix of sorrow and calm resignation. Her hands were steady as they rested on the table, the wedding ring she once cherished glinting under the soft light. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the desk. "It's for the best," he replied, his voice devoid of emotion, rehearsed and clinical. "We've grown apart." The words felt hollow even as he uttered them. A part of him wanted Emily to fight, to resist, to make him question his decisions. But she didn't. She simply nodded, her dignity intact even as her heart fractured. With a fluid motion, Emily signed her name. Her penmanship was elegant, betraying none of the turmoil within. Ethan's eyes flickered towards her for a brief moment, catching the shadow of a tear she refused to shed. She pushed the papers towards him, a quiet finality in her movement. This was it. Years of shared memories, sacrifices, and triumphs condensed into a single signature. As Ethan gathered the papers, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something infinitely valuable. But he pushed the thought aside, eager to chase the illusion of freedom and vitality that Olivia represented. 2 years passed like the turn of a page in a book Ethan barely remembered reading. His life with Olivia was everything he had imagined it would be: extravagant galas, jet-setting across continents, and a world that seemed tailored to their whims. Olivia was radiant, a whirlwind of charm and beauty that breathed life into Ethan's world. Yet, beneath the veneer of perfection, cracks began to appear. Ethan found himself working harder than ever to maintain their lifestyle, the demands of his empire weighing heavily on his shoulders. Olivia, meanwhile, grew restless. Her laughter, once a balm to Ethan's soul, began to sound hollow. She spent more time away from their opulent penthouse, her excuses flimsy and her affections increasingly rare. One fateful afternoon, as Ethan's car rolled through the bustling streets of the city, a flash of familiarity caught his eye. He ordered the driver to stop, his heart pounding as he stepped out onto the sidewalk. In the distance, sitting on a park bench surrounded by children, was Emily. She looked serene, her face illuminated by a quiet joy Ethan hadn't seen in years. For children, identical in appearance, their features unmistakably reminiscent of his own, gathered around her. Ethan froze, the revelation hitting him like a thunderbolt. Quadruplets. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of memories and timelines. Could they be his? The resemblance was undeniable, but the implications were overwhelming. That evening, Ethan returned to a home that felt emptier than ever. Olivia's luggage was lined up neatly by the door, her departure a storm brewing on the horizon. When she returned, her confession was brutal. She was leaving Ethan for Nathan Harper, a younger, wealthier tech magnate who had promised her the world. "You were just a stepping stone, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Nathan is everything you used to be and more." The words cut deep, leaving Ethan reeling. In a matter of hours, his carefully constructed world crumbled. His empire faced scandals and betrayals from within, and the financial foundations he had built began to collapse. Ethan Carter, once a titan among men, found himself at rock bottom. And yet, amidst the ruins of his life, a new chapter awaited, one he never could have anticipated. Ethan's world was no longer anchored by the certainties that had defined it for so long. The days following his encounter with Emily and the children were a haze of unanswered questions and spiraling emotions. The image of the Quadruplets haunted him, their piercing blue eyes a mirror to his own. For the first time in years, he found himself revisiting memories he had buried deep, moments from a life he had chosen to abandon. Ethan Carter was a man of reason and calculation, but this discovery had rendered him helpless against the tidal wave of regret and curiosity. Emily's life, on the other hand, was a stark contrast to Ethan's turmoil. She had carved out a modest yet fulfilling existence. Her apartment was far from the lavish mansion she once called home, but it was warm and filled with love. The Quadruplets, who were her pride and joy, brought an energy that transformed even the most mundane of days into cherished memories. Each child, though identical in appearance, had a personality that shone through. There was Clara, the curious and bookish one; Leo, whose infectious laughter filled every room; Sophie, a quiet artist with a penchant for drawing; and Max, the bold adventurer always testing boundaries. Emily had built a sanctuary for them, shielding them from the shadow of a man who had once been their father. Ethan's resolve to uncover the truth grew stronger with each passing day. He couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that he had abandoned more than a marriage. Yet, the prospect of confronting Emily filled him with trepidation. What would he even say? Would she allow him back into their lives, even if only as a father? He had always prided himself on being a man who faced challenges head-on, but this was uncharted territory. When Ethan finally mustered the courage to seek her out, it was an overcast morning. He found Emily at a small cafe near her home, a place that exuded a quiet charm. She was sitting by the window, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, lost in thought. As he approached, she looked up, her expression shifting from surprise to guarded composure. "Ethan," she said simply, her tone neutral but firm. He slid into the seat across from her, the words he had rehearsed on the way evaporating in the face of her calm gaze. "Emily, he began, faltering. He took a deep breath. "I saw you. At the park. With the children." Her eyes didn't waver, but he noticed the slightest tension in her jaw. "Are they mine?" he asked, the question hanging in the air between them like a fragile thread. Emily's silence was deafening. Finally, she placed her cup down with deliberate care. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "They're yours, Ethan. All 4 of them." The confirmation hit him with the force of a gale, yet her expression held no malice, only a quiet strength. "But you weren't here. When I needed you, you weren't here." Her words were a statement, not an accusation, but they cut deeper than any reprimand could. Ethan's mind raced, fragments of their past colliding with the reality of the present. He thought of the nights he had spent immersed in his work, chasing deals and prestige while Emily had carried the burden of their relationship alone. He wanted to explain, to defend himself, but he knew there was no justification that could undo the pain he had caused. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice tinged with regret. "Because you didn't care to know," Emily replied, her tone unwavering. "You had already made your choice, Ethan. And I made mine." She leaned back, her gaze softening slightly. "I've built a life for them. A good life. They don't need you to come in and disrupt it. The conversation left Ethan reeling, but it also planted a seed of determination. He couldn't erase the past, but he could try to be a part of their future. For the first time, he began to confront the emptiness within him, the hollow victories and superficial successes that had come at such a high cost. He knew that rebuilding trust with Emily and forging a connection with his children would be a long and uncertain journey. But as he walked away from the cafe, a faint glimmer of purpose began to take root in his heart. The days following Ethan's meeting with Emily were marked by an unrelenting need to take action. Yet, action felt elusive. His once ironclad confidence was now tempered by the weight of responsibility and an unfamiliar vulnerability. Ethan Carter, the man who had orchestrated multimillion-dollar deals with a single phone call, now found himself fumbling through online parenting forums and reading articles on how to approach children he had never known. Each piece of advice felt inadequate, a pale substitute for the lived experiences he had missed. Emily had left the conversation in the cafe with a resolute clarity that both comforted and stung Ethan. She had not denied him the chance to meet his children, but neither had she invited him into their lives. They deserve stability, Ethan, she had said, her tone soft but firm. If you're serious about this, you'll need to show me. Show them. It was both a challenge and a lifeline, one Ethan grasped with desperate resolve. His first attempt at bridging the chasm was a simple one, a letter. He had spent hours crafting it, tearing up draft after draft as he tried to balance honesty with tact. In the end, the letter was as much an apology as it was an introduction. He poured his thoughts onto the page, describing his regrets, his hopes, and the desire to know them, not as an intruder but as a father who wanted to make amends. Emily agreed to read the letter to the children, her guarded expression giving nothing away as she took it from him. Several days later, Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Emily. "They're willing to meet you," it read. The simplicity of the words belied their significance. It was a tentative step, but it felt monumental to Ethan. He replied with a gratitude he couldn't fully express and began preparing for the meeting as if it were the most critical negotiation of his life. The meeting was set at a neutral location, a local community center with a small park. Ethan arrived early, his nerves taut and his mind racing with scenarios of how the encounter might unfold. He clutched a small bag containing carefully chosen gifts, not extravagant, but thoughtful. A book for Clara, a sketchpad for Sophie, a puzzle set for Leo, and a compass for Max. He hoped they would see these not as bribes, but as tokens of his desire to understand who they were. When Emily arrived with the children, Ethan's breath caught. Seeing them up close was like gazing into a fragmented mirror. Each child carried a piece of him, yet they were unmistakably their own people. Clara's eyes were sharp with curiosity. Sophie held onto her mother's hand with a quiet reserve. Leo's smile was hesitant but warm, and Max looked directly at Ethan with an intensity that was both unnerving and exhilarating. "Hi," Ethan said, his voice betraying his nerves. I'm Ethan, your father." The words felt heavy as they left his lips. He knelt down to meet their eyes, his carefully rehearsed lines evaporating in the moment. Instead, he simply said, "It's so good to meet you." Clara was the first to speak. "Why didn't you come sooner?" Her question was direct, her tone unguarded. It was a fair question, one Ethan had dreaded and expected in equal measure. He took a deep breath. "I made mistakes," he admitted, his voice steady despite the emotion welling up inside him. "I thought I was doing what was best, but I was wrong. I should have been here. I'm so sorry for that." He looked at each of them in turn. "I'm here now, and I'm hoping you'll let me be a part of your lives." The silence that followed was agonizing. Emily stood a few steps away, her expression unreadable as she observed. Then, to Ethan's astonishment, Max stepped forward and extended his hand. "Okay," he said simply. It was a single word, but it was a start. Ethan grasped the boy's hand, his heart swelling with a mix of relief and hope. The meeting was far from perfect. Clara remained skeptical. Sophie spoke only when prompted, and Leo alternated between enthusiasm and shyness. But it was a beginning, a fragile bridge spanning the divide Ethan had created. As they said their goodbyes, Ethan felt an unfamiliar yet welcome sensation, the faint stirrings of belonging. That night, as he reflected on the day's events, Ethan knew the road ahead would be arduous. Trust would have to be earned, relationships nurtured, and mistakes rectified. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond wealth or status. This journey wasn't about reclaiming the life he had lost. It was about building something new, something real. And he was ready to take the next step. The morning air was crisp as Ethan arrived at the park for his second meeting with the children. A layer of dew glistened on the grass, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow on the world. Despite the serene setting, Ethan's nerves were anything but calm. He had spent the previous days meticulously planning how to make this encounter more meaningful, how to show his children that he was serious about being in their lives. But even the best-laid plans couldn't quell the fear of rejection that gnawed at him. Emily had agreed to let the children spend a couple of hours with him unsupervised. She had laid down clear boundaries, reminding Ethan that this was about the children's comfort, not his need for redemption. He appreciated her straightforwardness, even if it made him acutely aware of the fragile trust she was extending. As he waited near the playground, 1,000 scenarios played out in his mind. What if they refused to talk to him? What if he said the wrong thing? Or worse, what if they decided they didn't want him in their lives at all? The children arrived with a mixture of emotions etched on their faces. Clara was the first to spot him, her curious eyes narrowing slightly as she whispered something to Sophie. Max trailed behind the group, his energy palpable even in his reserved demeanor. Leo darted ahead, his initial shyness from their first meeting replaced by a cautious eagerness. "Hi, Dad," Leo said, the word dad still foreign but carrying a tentative warmth. Ethan's heart swelled at the sound, and he smiled. "Hey, everyone," Ethan replied, doing his best to keep his tone light and welcoming. "I've planned a little adventure for us today. I hope you're ready." He gestured to a small picnic area he had set up, complete with snacks, games, and a map for a scavenger hunt he'd prepared. The children's reactions varied. Leo's excitement was immediate, Clara's skepticism lingered, Sophie's reserve held steady, and Max's guarded interest hinted at a spark of curiosity. The scavenger hunt turned out to be a stroke of genius. As they combed through the park searching for clues, the children began to relax, their laughter echoing through the trees. Leo took charge, eagerly deciphering the riddles Ethan had written, while Clara begrudgingly admitted that the puzzles were actually kind of clever. Sophie's artistic eye helped them spot hidden objects, and Max's adventurous spirit led them to explore areas of the park they might have otherwise overlooked. For the first time, Ethan felt a connection forming, tenuous but real. At the end of the hunt, they gathered around the picnic blanket to share the prizes Ethan had prepared, personalized journals for each of them, with their names embossed on the covers. "I thought these might be a way for you to keep track of your adventures," he explained, "or just a place to write down whatever you're feeling or thinking." The gesture was met with mixed reactions. Clara examined hers carefully, her expression neutral but not dismissive. Sophie traced the embossed letters with her fingers, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Leo flipped through the blank pages with enthusiasm, and Max declared his journal cool, which Ethan took as high praise. As the afternoon wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly relaxed. Ethan shared stories from his childhood, carefully selecting tales that were relatable rather than boastful. He wanted them to see him not as the distant, enigmatic figure he had been, but as someone who had once been a kid just like them. The stories prompted questions and, eventually, a surprising moment of openness from Clara. "Why did you leave?" she asked, her voice quiet but direct. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of its implications. Ethan took a deep breath, knowing that his answer would shape their perception of him. "I was wrong," he said honestly. "I thought I was doing what was best for everyone, but I see now that I wasn't. I made choices that hurt your mom, and they hurt you, too. I'm so sorry for that. I can't change the past, but I want to be here now. If you'll let me." Clara didn't respond immediately, but something in her expression softened. The other children remained quiet, their reactions a mix of contemplation and acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step forward. When it was time to say goodbye, Ethan felt a pang of reluctance. He wanted to stay, to continue building this fragile connection, but he knew that patience was key. As they left, Max turned back and waved, a small but significant gesture that filled Ethan with a renewed sense of hope. He packed up the remnants of the picnic, his mind already racing with ideas for their next meeting. This wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. The path was trembling beneath his feet, but it was a path nonetheless, and he was determined to walk it to the end. The following weeks unfolded with a cautious rhythm, as Ethan worked tirelessly to establish his presence in the children's lives. Every moment felt like a delicate negotiation, a balance between showing his intentions and respecting their boundaries. Emily, ever vigilant, kept her watchful eye on these interactions, granting him opportunities but remaining steadfast in her protective role. It was a dynamic that required patience, and for the first time in his life, patience became Ethan's guiding principle. Each child responded to him differently. Clara remained the most skeptical, her probing questions testing his resolve and sincerity. She had a way of phrasing things that cut to the core of Ethan's motivations. "Why did it take losing everything for you to come back?" she had asked one afternoon, her tone sharp yet curious. Ethan's answers, honest but cautious, seemed to placate her only slightly. Sophie, by contrast, opened up in small, subtle ways. She often brought him her sketches, her quiet gestures of sharing gradually weaving threads of connection between them. Max, bold and headstrong, demanded physical engagement. Soccer games, obstacle courses, and races where Ethan struggled to keep up but gladly participated. Leo, ever the peacemaker, acted as a bridge between them all, his laughter a constant reminder of the joy Ethan had missed. One particularly memorable day, Ethan decided to take the children to a nearby nature reserve. It was a place he had visited in his youth, and he hoped it would provide a setting where they could explore and bond without the distractions of modern life. The reserve's winding trails and hidden streams promised an adventure that might draw them closer together. Emily agreed to the plan, though her parting words carried a subtle warning. Don't disappoint them. The reserve's beauty was as Ethan remembered it. Towering trees formed a canopy overhead, their leaves filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The air was rich with the scent of earth and pine, and the sound of birdsong filled the spaces between their conversations. Armed with a map and a backpack filled with snacks and supplies, Ethan led the group along a trail that wound through the heart of the forest. At first, the children were tentative, their reactions mirroring the cautious excitement of their earlier meetings. But as the day progressed, their enthusiasm grew. Max raced ahead, daring his siblings to keep up. Sophie paused frequently to sketch the scenery, her quick, deliberate strokes capturing the essence of the landscape. Clara took the role of navigator, her sharp mind quickly mastering the map's intricacies. Leo, ever inquisitive, peppered Ethan with questions about the plants and animals they encountered. The highlight of the day came when they stumbled upon a small, crystal-clear stream. The children's initial hesitation gave way to delight as they removed their shoes and waded into the cool water. Ethan joined them, his laughter mingling with theirs as they splashed and played. For a fleeting moment, the barriers that had defined their relationship seemed to dissolve, leaving only the pure, unfiltered joy of shared experience. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the group gathered on a flat rock near the stream to enjoy a makeshift dinner of sandwiches and fruit. It was then that Clara, emboldened by the day's success, asked a question that had clearly been on her mind. "What do you want from us?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. "Why are you trying so hard now?" Ethan paused, the weight of her words settling over him. He met her gaze, his own steady but filled with emotion. "I don't want anything from you," he said finally. "I just want to know you, to be here for you. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not trying to fix the past. I'm trying to build something new. With all of you." The answer seemed to satisfy Clara, at least for the moment. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, the children's laughter ringing out once again as they shared stories and jokes. When it was time to leave, Ethan felt a bittersweet pang. The day had been a success, but he knew that the journey ahead was still fraught with challenges. Emily's expression was unreadable when they returned, though she acknowledged Ethan with a nod. They had a good time, she said simply, her tone neutral but not unkind. It was a small victory, but one Ethan clung to as he drove home. He reflected on the day's events, the triumphs and the vulnerabilities, and resolved to keep moving forward. Each step, no matter how small, was bringing him closer to the family he had once lost, and to the man he hoped to become. Ethan's progress with the children had brought him an unexpected sense of fulfillment, but it had also stirred feelings he wasn't prepared to face. The more time he spent with them, the more he became acutely aware of the void left by years of absence. While their moments together were filled with laughter and tentative connections, they were also marked by unspoken questions and lingering doubts that hung in the air like an invisible weight. One afternoon, during a quiet walk with Sophie, the cracks began to show. She had always been the quietest of the four, content to observe and speak through her art. Ethan had hoped their walk would give him a chance to understand her better. As they strolled along a tree-lined path near Emily's home, Sophie clutched her sketchbook to her chest, her eyes darting to every detail of their surroundings. "You like to draw," Ethan said, his voice soft. It was more of a statement than a question, but Sophie nodded anyway. "It helps me think," she replied, her tone barely above a whisper. She didn't elaborate, and Ethan hesitated before asking his next question. "What do you think about?" Sophie stopped walking, her gaze fixed on a patch of wildflowers swaying gently in the breeze. "About what it was like when you were gone," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "Mom doesn't talk about it much, but I remember." Ethan's chest tightened. He crouched down to her level, searching her face for signs of anger or blame, but all he saw was quiet pain. "I'm sorry, Sophie," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I can't take back the time I missed, but I want to be here for you now. For all of you. Can you give me that chance?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her sketchbook. Finally, she nodded, though her expression remained guarded. It wasn't the enthusiastic acceptance he'd hoped for, but it was something. While Ethan worked to bridge the gap with his children, his own life was far from stable. The fallout from his financial downfall still loomed large, and he was struggling to rebuild his career. Former business associates, once eager to align themselves with his name, now avoided him. The lavish lifestyle he had once enjoyed was a distant memory, replaced by a modest apartment and a growing stack of unpaid bills. One evening, as Ethan reviewed his dwindling bank account, a knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Emily standing there, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She looked around the small apartment, her eyes lingering on the worn furniture and sparse decor. This is a far cry from the man who once lived in a mansion. Ethan closed the door and leaned against it, sighing. "Things change," he said simply. Emily turned to face him, her arms crossed. "I've been thinking about this, about you being in their lives. I want it to work, Ethan, but it has to be real. They've already been through so much. I can't let you be a part of their lives if it's just a passing phase." "It's not," Ethan said firmly. "I know I failed in the past, but I'm trying, Emily. I'm not the same man I was." Emily studied him for a long moment, as if weighing his words against the years of hurt he had caused. Finally, she nodded. "Then prove it," she said. "Not just to me, but to them. They need to see that you're here to stay." The challenge was clear, and Ethan knew it wouldn't be easy. But as Emily left, he felt a renewed determination. He wasn't just fighting to regain his children's trust. He was fighting to rebuild himself, to become a man worthy of their love and respect. As the weeks continued, the cracks in their burgeoning relationship began to mend, slowly but surely. Each child opened up to him in their own way, their moments of connection small but meaningful. Clara's questions grew less pointed. Sophie began sharing her drawings without hesitation. Max invited him to join in his games without reservation, and Leo's laughter became a constant in their interactions. Yet, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper remained unresolved. Beneath the surface, there were still wounds that needed healing, truths that needed to be spoken. And as much as he wanted to shield his children from more pain, He knew that true reconciliation required honesty, no matter how difficult it might be. The days grew shorter, and with them came an undeniable urgency for Ethan to address the unspoken truths that lingered between him and his children. He could feel it in the way Clara's sharp questions became more probing, in Sophie's quiet hesitations, and in the moments of unfiltered curiosity from Leo and Max. Their growing trust in him was fragile, and Ethan knew that to solidify it, he would have to confront the shadows of his past with unflinching honesty. It was during a rare moment of quiet that Ethan decided the time had come. The children had gathered in Emily's living room for their weekly family movie night, a tradition that Ethan had recently been invited to join. As the credits rolled on the screen and the children began to disperse, Ethan cleared his throat, his voice steady but edged with determination. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked, addressing all four of them. The children exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Emily, seated in a nearby armchair, remained silent, her expression neutral but watchful. The children settled on the couch, their postures ranging from relaxed to wary. Ethan stood before them, his hands clasped as he searched for the right words. "There's something I need to tell you," he began. "Something I should have said a long time ago." He paused, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "I wasn't there for you when I should have been. I made choices that hurt our family, and for that, I'm deeply sorry." Clara's gaze didn't waver. "Why did you leave?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with the weight of years of unanswered questions. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I thought I was doing what was best at the time," he admitted. "I thought that focusing on my career and providing for the family was enough. But I was wrong. I lost sight of what really mattered, and by the time I realized it, I didn't know how to fix it. So I ran. I let you down." The silence that followed was heavy, each of the children processing his words in their own way. Sophie looked down at her sketchbook, her fingers tracing invisible lines on the cover. Leo's expression was contemplative, while Max's brow furrowed as if he were trying to reconcile Ethan's confession with the man he had come to know. Clara broke the silence. "Did you even think about us? Or was it just easier to leave?" Her words were sharp, but her voice wavered slightly, betraying the pain beneath her accusation. Ethan's heart ached at her question. "I thought about you every day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I was too proud and too afraid to face the mistakes I'd made. I thought you'd be better off without me. I see now how wrong I was." Sophie finally looked up. "You're here now," she said quietly. "Does that mean you won't leave again?" Ethan dropped to one knee in front of them, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here to stay," he said firmly. "I can't promise I'll always get it right, but I will never stop trying to be the father you deserve. You have my word." The children didn't respond immediately, but something shifted in the air between them. The tension eased slightly, replaced by a tentative understanding. Clara leaned back against the couch, her arms crossed but her expression less guarded. Sophie gave him a small nod, and Leo's lips curved into a faint smile. Max was the first to speak. "Okay," he said simply, "but you've got to keep up with us." Ethan chuckled, the sound both a release of tension and a promise. "I'll do my best," he replied. Emily's voice broke the momentary silence. "That's a start," she said, her tone measured but not unkind. Ethan glanced at her, and for the first time in years, he saw a flicker of something akin to hope in her eyes. The night ended with a sense of cautious optimism. The road ahead was still uncertain, but Ethan felt a renewed determination to see it through. He had crossed the point of no return, and there was no looking back. For the first time, he truly believed that he could rebuild what had been lost, not as the man he once was, but as the man he was striving to become. The weeks following Ethan's heartfelt confession brought a tenuous piece to the Carter family dynamic. Each of the children began to open up in their own ways, revealing fragments of themselves that Ethan cherished more than he could have imagined. Yet, even as bonds formed and trust grew, the past refused to remain silent. Emily's quiet but watchful presence often reminded Ethan that redemption was an ongoing journey, not a destination. It was during a chilly autumn morning that the first crack in their fragile progress appeared. Clara, ever the inquisitor, approached Ethan in the middle of their scheduled outing at a local library. The soft hum of patrons' conversations surrounded them as she placed a stack of books on the table. Her sharp gaze caught Ethan off guard. "Did you know Mom was going to keep us?" Clara asked bluntly, her voice low but laden with accusation. Ethan froze. He had anticipated many questions, but not this one. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully, his brow furrowing. Clara's expression tightened. "She told me. When you left, there was talk about you trying to take us. Lawyers and custody battles. Did you want to fight for us, or was leaving just easier?" The weight of her question pressed against him, and Ethan knew this moment required more than just words. "Clara," he began, choosing his tone with care, "when your mom and I decided to separate, I made mistakes. I let other people influence my decisions because I thought it was best. But the truth is, I didn't fight hard enough. I should have." Clara crossed her arms, her skepticism unwavering. "So, you're saying you gave up?" "I'm saying I let my fear and pride get in the way of what mattered most," Ethan admitted, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his chest. "I'm not proud of that. But I'm here now, and I'm not running again." Clara's silence was deafening. She gave a small nod, her expression inscrutable, and returned to her books. Though her reaction stung, Ethan knew it was a step forward. Facing the hard truths was necessary, even if it reopened old wounds. Meanwhile, Sophie, Leo, and Max had been forging their own paths in this new chapter of their lives. Sophie's sketches began to include Ethan, his silhouette in a park, his profile as he read, even his hands clasped together during moments of thought. Leo, with his boundless energy, pulled Ethan into endless games and adventures, making it impossible to dwell on his shortcomings for long. Max, though still guarded, started to seek Ethan's advice on small matters, a sign that trust was taking root. Yet, it was Emily who posed the greatest challenge. She had maintained a careful distance, her interactions with Ethan cordial, but devoid of the warmth they once shared. One evening, as the children settled into bed, Emily approached Ethan on the porch of her modest home. The night air was crisp, the stars scattered like jewels across the sky. "Clara's been asking questions," Emily said, her arms wrapped around herself against the chill. "She's trying to make sense of everything. I told her the truth, but she's smart. She sees the cracks." Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "She asked me about the custody battle, about whether I wanted to fight for them." Emily's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what did you say?" "The truth," Ethan replied. "That I didn't fight hard enough. That I was wrong." Emily studied him for a long moment. "They need stability, Ethan, not just promises. If you want to be in their lives, you have to show them you're here to stay. Words aren't enough." "I know," Ethan said quietly, "but I also know that actions take time. I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. I just want to prove to them, to you, that I'm serious." Emily's expression softened ever so slightly. "We'll see," she said, her voice tinged with both skepticism and hope. "But don't expect this to be easy. The damage you caused, it's deep." Ethan nodded. He had no illusions about the road ahead. Yet, despite the obstacles, he felt an unshakable resolve to see this through. For the first time in years, he understood that rebuilding wasn't about erasing the past, but about laying the foundation for something new, something stronger. The weeks continued with their share of highs and lows. Moments of laughter and connection were tempered by lingering doubts and unresolved conflicts. Ethan found solace in the progress he was making, however incremental. He knew that trust couldn't be rushed, and he was willing to earn it one step at a time. But as autumn gave way to winter, a new challenge loomed on the horizon, one that would test everything Ethan had worked for and force him to confront the most painful parts of his past. The consequences of his earlier choices were far from fully revealed, and the time was fast approaching when he would have to face them head-on. Winter descended upon the town with an icy grip, its chill seeping into every corner of Ethan's life. The once tentative peace that had settled over his relationship with his children now felt fragile, as if the weight of unspoken truths might shatter it at any moment. The time had come to confront the parts of his past that he had spent so long avoiding. Ethan knew this reckoning would demand more than words. It would require a level of honesty that stripped him bare. It began one evening as the family gathered in Emily's living room. The fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Clara had been quiet throughout dinner, her sharp gaze fixed on Ethan with an intensity that unnerved him. Finally, she spoke, her voice cutting through the comfortable silence. "There's something you're still not telling us," she said. The statement wasn't accusatory, but it carried the weight of certainty. Ethan's throat tightened. He glanced at Emily, who met his gaze with a steady, unreadable expression. She wasn't going to intervene. This was his moment to face. "You're right," Ethan admitted, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "There are things I haven't told you. Not because I don't want to, but because I didn't know how." He paused, taking a deep breath. "I think it's time you knew everything." The room fell silent as Ethan began to speak. He told them about the pressures of his career, the choices he made to prioritize success over family, and the spiral of guilt and pride that had kept him away. But as he spoke, he realized there was more, a deeper pain he had never fully acknowledged. "After I left," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I convinced myself that staying away was the best thing for all of you. But the truth is, I was ashamed. I was ashamed of failing as a husband and as a father. And instead of facing that, I ran." Leo's brows knit together in confusion. "But why didn't you come back? Why didn't you fix it?" Ethan met his son's gaze, the pain in his eyes mirrored in his own. "Because I didn't think I deserved to," he said simply. "I thought you'd be better off without me. It took losing everything to realize how wrong I was." Clara's expression softened, though her voice remained firm. "You should have fought for us. You should have been here." "You're absolutely right," Ethan replied. "And I'll regret not being there every day for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. I know I have to earn your trust, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes." As his words settled over the room, Sophie spoke for the first time. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. The question caught Ethan off guard. "Happy?" he repeated. Sophie nodded. "You always look sad, even when you're smiling. Are you happy being here? With us?" Ethan considered her question carefully. "I'm happy that I have this chance," he said. "I'm happy that I get to know you and be part of your lives. But I'm also sad for the time we lost. And I think that's okay. Being here with you makes me feel like I'm finally where I'm supposed to be." Max, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Does that mean you're staying? Like, forever?" Ethan smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through his usual composure. "Yes, Max. I'm staying. Forever." Emily, who had been observing silently, finally spoke. "That's a big promise," she said, her tone measured but not unkind. "They'll hold you to it." "I know," Ethan replied. "And I'm ready." The conversation left the family emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. The air seemed clearer, the barriers between them less daunting. As the children headed to bed, each offered Ethan a small gesture of connection. A hug, a pat on the back, a quiet goodnight. When Ethan was alone with Emily, she turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You did well tonight," she said simply. "It's a start," Ethan replied. "But I know there's still a long way to go." Emily nodded. "Just don't forget that words are only the beginning. They'll be watching what you do from now on." "I won't forget," Ethan promised. As the house grew quiet, Ethan felt an unfamiliar sense of peace. He had faced his past, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew he was no longer walking it alone. The winter winds grew fiercer, rattling the windows of Ethan's modest apartment as he sat at his desk, pen in hand. Before him lay a growing stack of letters, each addressed to a different individual from his past. Former colleagues, friends he had alienated, and even mentors whose advice he had ignored in pursuit of success. He had resolved to make amends not just with his family, but with the many lives he had impacted during his relentless climb to the top. Each word he wrote felt like a brick placed in the foundation of a new life, one built on accountability and humility. Ethan's efforts to rebuild extended beyond his personal relationships. He had taken on a new role at a local nonprofit organization, where his expertise in business strategy was put to use helping small businesses recover from economic hardship. It was humbling work, far removed from the high-stakes deals that had once defined his career. But for the first time, Ethan found meaning in his work that went beyond financial gain. One cold afternoon, Ethan invited the children to visit his office at the nonprofit. He wanted them to see this new side of him, to understand that his transformation wasn't just a facade. The office was a far cry from the gleaming skyscrapers he once called home, but its warmth and bustling energy were inviting. "What do you do here?" Max asked, his curious eyes scanning the room filled with desks, stacks of papers, and the occasional laughter of coworkers. "I help people who need it," Ethan replied simply. "Small businesses that are struggling, people who are trying to make a fresh start. Kind of like me." Clara's gaze lingered on a bulletin board covered with thank you notes from local shop owners. "Do you like it?" she asked, her tone skeptical but curious. Ethan smiled. "I do. It feels good to be part of something that makes a difference. And it's helping me learn what really matters." Sophie, who had been sketching quietly in the corner, looked up. "Do you think you'll ever go back to your old job?" The question gave Ethan pause. He had asked himself the same thing countless times. "I don't think so," he said after a moment. "That life, it wasn't good for me. It made me lose sight of what's important. I'd rather build something new." The children seemed to accept his answer, their expressions thoughtful as they explored the office. For Ethan, the moment felt like another small victory, a step toward earning their trust not just as a father but as a man striving to do better. Meanwhile, Ethan's relationship with Emily remained a careful dance of guarded optimism. They had begun to share more conversations, their exchanges less formal and more reflective of the bond they had once shared. One evening, as they stood side by side washing dishes after a family dinner, Emily broke the comfortable silence. "I've seen the changes in you," she said, her voice quiet but sincere. "The kids have seen it too. It's different. Good different." Ethan glanced at her, his hands pausing in the soapy water. "Thank you. That means more than you know." Emily smiled faintly, but her gaze remained on the sink. "It doesn't erase the past," she continued, "but it makes me believe that maybe we can move forward. For the kids." "For the kids," Ethan echoed, though a small part of him dared to hope that moving forward might mean more than just co-parenting. The weeks turned into months, and the Carter family began to find a new rhythm. Ethan's presence became a constant, his actions reinforcing the promises he had made. He attended school events, helped with homework, and even joined in family traditions that he had once missed. Each moment, no matter how small, felt like a step toward healing the wounds he had caused. But just as the family seemed to be settling into this new normal, a letter arrived that threatened to disrupt everything. It was from a former business partner, a man Ethan hadn't spoken to since his company's collapse. The letter contained allegations of unethical practices that had taken place under Ethan's leadership, practices that Ethan had been too distracted or too willing to ignore at the time. Ethan's heart sank as he read the accusations. They were true. He had known about the shady dealings but had turned a blind eye, rationalizing it as a necessary evil in the pursuit of success. Now, those decisions were coming back to haunt him, threatening not only his hard-earned progress, but also the fragile trust he had built with his family. As he folded the letter and placed it on the table, Ethan knew he had to confront this head-on. He couldn't hide from his past any longer, not if he wanted to truly rebuild his life. But the thought of facing his children, of telling them about yet another failure, filled him with dread. Ethan spent the night wrestling with his conscience, drafting and redrafting how he would explain this to his family. By morning, he was resolved. The climb to redemption, he realized, wasn't about avoiding the consequences of his actions. It was about facing them, no matter how painful, and proving that he was willing to do the work to make things right. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he placed the letter on the dining table. The children were gathered, their chatter filling the room with an energy that both warmed and unsettled him. Emily sat nearby, her eyes narrowing as she caught sight of Ethan's unusually tense demeanor. The time had come to lay bare the truth, to confront his past with a transparency he had once lacked. "Can I have everyone's attention?" Ethan's voice cut through the noise. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward him. He glanced at Emily, who gave him a slight nod, her expression unreadable but encouraging. There's something I need to share with all of you, Ethan began, his voice steady despite the knot tightening in his chest. It's about my past, about things I did during my career that I'm not proud of. The children exchanged uncertain glances, their curiosity tempered by a growing unease. Clara was the first to speak, her tone cautious. What kind of things? Ethan took a deep breath. When I was running my company, I made choices that hurt people. I ignored things I shouldn't have, allowed unethical practices because I thought they were necessary to succeed. I was so focused on winning that I lost sight of what was right. Sophie's brow furrowed. What does that mean? Did you break the law? Ethan hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I didn't break the law directly, but I didn't stop others from doing things that were wrong. I looked the other way because it was easier, and because I told myself it was part of doing business. But that doesn't make it okay. Leo's voice was softer, his expression pained. Did people get hurt? Yes, Ethan admitted, his heart heavy. People lost their jobs, their savings, their trust. And I have to live with the fact that I played a part in that. I'm trying to make amends now, but I know I can never fully undo the harm I caused. The room fell silent, the weight of his confession settling over them like a thick fog. Clara's face was a mixture of anger and disappointment. So all the money, the houses, the fancy stuff, it came from hurting people? Ethan nodded. Not all of it, but too much of it. And I'm sorry. I wish I could go back and change what I did, but all I can do now is be honest and try to do better. Emily, who had been silent throughout, finally spoke. Why tell them now? Her tone was measured, but her eyes held a flicker of something deeper. Perhaps hope, perhaps doubt. Because they deserve the truth, Ethan said simply. I've spent too much of my life hiding from my mistakes. I want to be better, not just for myself, but for all of you. And that starts with being honest. Max's voice broke the tension. Does this mean you're going to jail or something? He asked, his eyes wide. Ethan managed a faint smile. No, Max. But it does mean I'm working to make things right, even if it's hard. I'm helping people rebuild, just like I'm trying to rebuild with all of you. The conversation continued late into the evening, each child expressing their feelings in their own way. Clara remained guarded, her questions sharp but fair. Sophie's quiet observations hinted at a mix of sadness and understanding. Leo's open heart made room for cautious forgiveness, while Max, ever pragmatic, seemed to accept the situation with a simple determination to move forward. As the family dispersed for the night, Emily lingered in the kitchen with Ethan. That couldn't have been easy, she said, handing him a mug of tea. It wasn't, Ethan admitted, but it was necessary. They deserve to know who I really am, the good and the bad. Emily nodded, her expression softening. It's a start. And for what it's worth, I'm proud of you for facing it. Ethan looked at her, the warmth in her words igniting a small ember of hope within him. Thank you. That means a lot. The night ended quietly, but the impact of Ethan's confession lingered. He knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. By facing the truth, he had taken a step closer to becoming the man he wanted to be, for himself, for Emily, and for his children. The path ahead was still steep, but he was ready to climb it, one step at a time. The dawn of spring arrived with a quiet promise, its gentle warmth melting away the remnants of winter and bringing with it a sense of renewal. For Ethan, the season mirrored his own journey. His past mistakes no longer felt like insurmountable weights, but like lessons etched into his foundation, guiding him toward a better version of himself. The road had been steep, but the summit was finally in sight. Ethan's days had found a rhythm. His work at the nonprofit continued to flourish, each small success a testament to the value of second chances. He had helped a local bakery secure funding, assisted a struggling mechanic shop in expanding its services, and mentored a young entrepreneur with a vision for sustainable clothing. These victories, though modest, filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known during his days in the corporate world. At home, the Carter family was finding its own balance. Clara's sharp edges softened as she began to let her guard down, her skepticism giving way to curiosity. One evening, as they worked on a school project together, she paused and looked at Ethan with an expression that surprised him. I'm glad you're here, she admitted, her voice almost shy. Even if it's hard sometimes. Ethan's heart swelled. I'm glad too, Clara. More than you know. Sophie's sketches now adorn the walls of Ethan's apartment, each piece a window into her vibrant imagination. She had started sharing her art more openly, even allowing Ethan to attend her first gallery show at school. Watching her beam with pride as she stood beside her work was a moment Ethan would carry with him forever. Max had taken to including Ethan in his adventures, dragging him along for hikes, soccer matches, and even a disastrous but hilarious attempt at building a treehouse. Leo, the peacemaker of the group, remained Ethan's steadfast ally, his laughter a constant reminder of the joy they were rebuilding together. Emily, too, had begun to relax around Ethan. Their co-parenting dynamic had grown smoother, their conversations more natural. One evening, after a family dinner, they found themselves sitting on the porch, the quiet hum of the night wrapping around them like a blanket. "You've come a long way," Emily said, her tone contemplative. "The kids see it. I see it." Ethan smiled softly. "I couldn't have done it without them. Or without you." Emily looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "I'm proud of you, Ethan, and I think maybe it's time to let go of the past. For both of us." Her words hung in the air, their significance sinking in. Ethan nodded, gratitude and hope swelling within him. "Thank you, Emily. That means everything to me." As the weeks passed, the family began making plans for the future. A camping trip was scheduled, a unanimous decision made during a rare moment of agreement between the siblings. Ethan threw himself into the preparations, determined to make it a memory they would all cherish. The trip was everything Ethan had hoped for. Nights spent under a blanket of stars, days filled with laughter and exploration, and moments of quiet connection that solidified the bonds they had been rebuilding. As they sat around the campfire on their final night, Leo turned to Ethan with a grin. "You're not bad at this dad stuff," he teased, earning a chorus of laughter from his siblings. Ethan chuckled, his heart full. "I've had the best teachers," he replied, looking at each of them in turn. As the flames flickered and the night deepened, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. He had made it through the storm, not unscathed but stronger for it. The journey wasn't over. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt, but he was no longer the man who had run from his family, his failures, or himself. He was Ethan Carter, a father, a friend, and a man who had fought to find his way back to what truly mattered. And as he gazed at his children, their faces illuminated by the firelight, he knew with unwavering certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thank you for listening until the end. What did you think of this story? If you can, leave your feedback in the comments. It helps me improve and motivates me to keep sharing stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and activate the notification bell. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will also touch your heart. A big kiss, and see you in the next story.